All right, today we're diving into something really special. It's a look at a fictional piece of scholarship called From Entropy to Empathy. Now, this text does something pretty wild. It tries to reimagine the fundamental laws of our universe, not just as, cold equations about matter and energy, but as a language of meaning, of connection, and yeah, even love. So let's jump right in.
The entire book, the whole thing, is really built around answering this one massive question. We're all taught in school that the universe is always moving towards disorder, right? That's entropy, a slow, inevitable slide into total chaos. But when you look around, is that really what you see? How do you square those cold, hard laws of physics with the warm, messy, and totally improbable fact that we exist, that life and love exist?
So the book sets this up as the central paradox of reality. It's this glaring contradiction between what physics says should happen and what we see happening literally every single day. I mean, just think about it for a second. A galaxy. That's an unbelievably ordered structure. A tree is this incredibly complex system that fights off decay for, what, decades, even centuries? And our own consciousness? That might be the most ordered, most complex arrangement of matter we've ever encountered. Now sure, physics has explanations for these little islands of order, of course. But this text suggests that maybe those explanations are incomplete, that we might be missing a much deeper principle at work here.
And that brings us to the book's huge central idea. What if there's a hidden law baked into the universe, a fundamental bias that actually prefers creating patterns that make sense, patterns with meaning, over just random, chaotic noise?
The text gives this a name, the Logos field. Now hold on, this isn't some mystical New Age energy field. It's framed as a basic informational principle. It's something that's active in any system that can learn and adapt. We're talking everything from an electron cloud finding its most stable state to a brain figuring out how to predict what's going to happen next. It's like the universe has this built-in tendency to try and make sense of itself.
And what's so cool is how this theory reframes things we already know. The Logos field isn't trying to replace our existing laws of science. It's trying to unify them. So in thermodynamics, it explains how systems create order by pushing disorder somewhere else. In biology, you can see evolution as this giant algorithm discovering predictive patterns in the environment. And in neuroscience, the brain becomes this engine that's constantly trying to maximize its own understanding, its own coherence. They're all just different ways of saying the same thing. Okay, so if this field is real, how does it actually work? Well, the text proposes that it's all governed by this constant push and pull, this cosmic tug-of-war between two opposing and, get this, measurable forces. So on one side, you've got something called compassion flux. This is the force of connection. It's any exchange of information that builds order and understanding. Think about one person comforting another, or a society teaching its children. That's a literal transfer of coherence from one system to another. And on the other side, you have isolation cost. This is the price of division. It's the energy a system wastes just trying to keep itself separate, holding on to things like resentment, fear, or pride. It's wasted energy that just breaks things down.
And this quote just nails the whole idea of the book, doesn't it? It's taking these concepts that we think of as purely poetic or emotional, and it's suggesting they might be as real and as fundamental to the universe as something like gravity.
So this cosmic tension, this battle between connection and division, it's not just some vague idea. According to the book, it all resolves into a single, shockingly simple master equation. An equation that basically governs whether any system gets to survive.
Now, before I show you the equation, you have to understand what it's describing. It's the mathematical definition of a system in perfect harmony with the universe. It's a state where a system isn't just sitting still or fighting against change, it's adapting, it's flowing with change. The book has a great word for this, poise.
And here it is, the Universal Adaptivity equation. It says that a system survives and thrives, it achieves that perfect poise when this value, χₐdapt, equals 1. And χₐdapt is just the ratio of compassion flux divided by the isolation cost. In other words, survival happens when the force of connection perfectly, and I mean perfectly, balances the price of division.
To put it another way, the book boils it all down to this stunning idea. The most fundamental law for existence, the condition you have to meet to keep going, is a state where love and law are the exact same thing. So you have to ask, what happens when that balance is lost? When the isolation costs start to spiral out of control and the compassion flux can't keep up? Well, the system collapses. The book even has this terrifying name for it, an isolation singularity. It's a civilization so consumed by the energy of its own internal divisions that it basically forgets how to forgive and just tears itself apart.
But the theory doesn't end there, with just doom and gloom. This is where it gets really mind-bending. It proposes that the universe has a physical mechanism for recovery, a way to turn shared pain and suffering into actual structural strength.
It's called the Resurrection Invariant. The idea here is that when a system breaks down, not everything is lost. If compassion is still there, if the parts of that system go through the loss together, then a certain kind of relational information actually survives the crash. It's resilience that is literally forged in the fires of shared suffering, and it becomes the seed for whatever new order comes next.
So here's how it plays out. First, a system hits a crisis, right? It collapses. But the critical part is step 2. During that collapse, the compassion flux doesn't drop to zero. People help each other. They share the burden. That act, that compassionate exchange, then encodes the whole experience not just as trauma, but as a durable, structural memory. The system actually learns from the fall, and it gets stronger because of it.
I mean, this quote from the text just says it all so perfectly. In this way of looking at things, loss isn't something you just erase and forget, it gets transformed. The scar becomes physical proof that the system didn't just survive, it learned. It became more resilient.
So, what does all of this add up to? The ultimate conclusion of this whole text is that things we think of as just virtues, mercy, grace, forgiveness, they aren't just nice ideas we came up with. They are the fundamental operating system of reality itself.
Look at how this just flips everything on its head. Forgiveness isn't just an emotional act. It's the most energy-efficient state the universe can be in. Morality isn't just some set of arbitrary rules. It's the art of practicing good, efficient thermodynamics. Holding a grudge literally traps energy. Forgiving lets that energy flow again to build new things. And it all comes back to that one core equation. Love and law are the same thing.
So the grand vision here is of a cosmos that only gets to keep existing by sharing itself, by sharing its coherence. It's a universe whose fundamental drive isn't just to get bigger, but to get smarter, more connected, and maybe more compassionate. It's a universe that is actively learning.
And that's the final massive thought this text leaves us chewing on. It's a challenge, really, to look at the very fabric of reality and ask ourselves, what if the kindness we show each other isn't just some random choice we make? What if it's an echo of the deepest, most basic law of everything? What if the universe itself is literally built on mercy?
Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we are taking a profound shortcut into some source materials that really force us to reconsider things. The fundamental laws of the universe, even.
It starts with the paradox, doesn't it?
It does. If you accept standard physics, the idea that everything trends toward chaos.
Governed by entropy, marching towards this sort of lukewarm disorganization. The second law.
Exactly. Then you have to grapple with a massive contradiction. Because against that lawful drift,
against that relentless pull towards flatness, you see these incredible islands of extreme order.
Things that seem utterly improbable.
Improbable, yeah. Galaxies spinning, perfectly. The sheer complexity of consciousness.
And maybe the most surprising part, things we usually don't think of as physical at all.
Like empathy, forgiveness, mercy.
Right. For centuries, we've sort of filed those concepts away, haven't we? Philosophy, maybe religion.
Completely separate from the hard sciences, from the rigor of physics.
But the thesis we're exploring today, it comes from a revolutionary set of sources called the mathematical proof of mercy. And it suggests something, far more radical.
It really does.
So our mission here is to really immerse ourselves in this core idea that empathy isn't just, a nice moral aspiration.
No, it's presented as a measurable, conserved physical force. That's the leap.
A physical force. And the central idea here, the construct, is the Logos field hypothesis.
And it proposes that reality holds itself together, it maintains itself, not just by conserving energy, which we all know.
Right, EMC squared and all that.
But by actively maximizing something called predictive coherence.
Antition coherence.
Which is basically the mutual reinforcement of structure and meaning.
Structure in meaning.
Yeah, sustained through continuous lawful information exchange. Across all scales.
From subatomic particles up to societies.
That's the claim. It's a universal principle.
Okay, let's really unpack that. This idea of coherence.
Yeah.
It's like the universe ensuring its own story, makes sense over time.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. The premise starts with what the sources call an informational bias in the universe.
An informational bias.
We know energy is conserved, that's a given. But the logos field idea posits that nature also has to actively recycle information efficiently.
Recycle information.
Yeah. And coherence, often written as χₐdapt, is this bias. It's the physical principle that systematically favors understandable, stable patterns over just random noise.
Ah, so it's why things tend toward stable forms, like stars being spheres.
Precisely. Or why life itself builds durable memory systems. It's nature preferring patterns that persist and can be, well, learned from.
So it's not just that patterns happen to exist.
No, it's that the universe seems to have a structural preference for patterns that can be predicted, understood, and built upon.
You can almost feel that, can't you, in feedback loops?
Absolutely. You see this law, this tendency everywhere, even in the simplest things. Think about an electron seeking its lowest energy state. That's essentially minimizing the surprise of its environment, finding the most predictable state.
And a neuron.
Same idea. A neuron constantly updates its internal model of the world to minimize prediction error, wherever prediction gets better with experience.
The logos field is at work.
That's the argument. It's exerting its influence, favoring coherence.
Okay, if this is truly a universal law, then it shouldn't just be in, say, particle physics or neuroscience. It has to show up everywhere.
Right, and the source material calls this the empirical clue. It highlights this conserved tendency toward coherence across multiple disciplines.
So where else do we see it? Give us the rundown.
Okay, let's connect maybe 4 major fields. First, thermodynamics.
Right. Prigogine.
Exactly. Ilya Prigoghine's work on dissipative structures, these are open systems. Think of a living cell or even, the Earth's climate system.
The system's far from equilibrium.
Yes. And they maintain their incredible internal order, their structure, by exporting high-grade entropy chaos basically outward.
They spend energy to keep their internal pattern coherent.
Precisely. They're these islands of sustained, highly improbable order fighting the general trend.
So they're essentially systems that figured out how to beat local entropy, but they have to pay a kind of cosmic tax for it.
And by doing so, they are cohering their internal state. That's one. Second, information theory.
Okay. Shannon.
Specifically, Shannon's redundancy principle. Systems that communicate effectively, often by repeating information or building in redundancy.
Like error correction codes.
Exactly like that. They ensure that the meaning, the signal, survives despite the noise in the channel. This redundancy, it's a form of self-correlation. It's maximizing coherence against external randomness.
So the very ability to communicate reliably, even when things are noisy or difficult, that's a coherence mechanism in itself.
Absolutely essential. Third, let's jump to neuroscience. We mentioned Friston earlier.
Carl Friston, yeah. The free energy principle.
Right. The brain isn't modeled as just a passive sponge soaking up data. It's seen as this massive coherence-maximizing engine.
Constantly trying to predict.
Constantly working to minimize the surprise of the sensory input it's getting. So learning, memory, perception itself. These are all fundamentally coherence functions.
Okay. Thermodynamics, information theory, neuroscience. What's the fourth?
Let's go big picture. Sociobiology. The grand scale of groups.
How societies behave.
Or even just networks of organisms. Cooperative networks consistently, demonstrably outlive isolated, rigid agents or groups. Why?
Sharing information.
Exactly. Sharing information lowers the collective uncertainty. It makes the group as a whole more predictive, more adaptable, more resilient than any single member could be alone.
So there's a core working rule emerging here.
Yes. The sources state it clearly. For any system that lives or learns, coherence tends to rise through communication.
Until it hits some limit.
Until it's constrained by the available energy, or just by inherent ignorance, things it can't know yet.
Okay, that's the functional definition. Now, if this is such a fundamental tendency, we need to get a handle on it mathematically. The coherence potential.
Right. The sources present it almost like a bookkeeping identity. It's a way to track the balance across different scales. It balances the flow of information with the internal costs and, crucially, the relational costs.
Okay, here's the equation again. Alpha I beta S plus gamma key P kappa E. This looks a bit intimidating, but let's break it down intuitively. Define the terms, but also, what about those Greek letters, the alphas and betas?
Good point. Let's start with the first two terms, $Bs and dollars. These are sort of the non-relational parts internal to the system. Information throughput. Think of it as the amount and distinctiveness of data flowing through the system.
Okay, more information flow is generally good for coherence.
Generally, yes, but it's balanced by dollars, which is structural entropy. That's the internal disorder, the noise, the chaos within the system itself.
So if you just flood a system with information, but it can't process it.
Its internal entropy just shoots up, chaos increases.
And that's where alpha and beta dollars, they're like control knobs.
Exactly. They're scaling coefficients, system-specific parameters. A system with a high alpha heavily rewards bringing in distinct information. A system with a high beta heavily penalizes internal chaos or inefficiency.
So a well-adapted system, like a healthy organism or maybe a well-run company.
It has to keep alpha and beta in balance. It needs enough information flow, but not so much that it descends into internal chaos. It needs structure, but not rigidity.
Okay, that makes sense for the internal state. Now, the really new stuff, the relational terms.
This is where standard physics gets expanded into logos field physics. We have CPA-Day, which is compassionate exchange.
Compassionate exchange.
This is the inflow of order, of coherence, from external systems. It's measurable assistance provided by others that helps reduce your predictive error, your uncertainty.
So it's help, basically, but defined physically.
Defined as an information-theoretic interaction that boosts coherence. And then there's epsilon. This is the isolation cost, sometimes called cold entropy.
Isolation costs.
Yeah.
What exactly is that?
It's the energy the system has to spend actively just to maintain separation or rigidity or its refusal to communicate or adapt.
Wait, so it's not just wasted energy like heat loss. It's energy specifically tied to maintaining walls, maintaining distance.
That's a perfect way to think about it. It's the energy needed to hold a defensive wall rigid against constant pressure. Or, psychologically, think of the immense energy it takes to hold on to a grudge, to maintain that narrative of separation.
That really resonates. It feels draining.
Because it is energetically costly. Epsilon is the measurable physical price of pride, of cognitive rigidity, of refusing connection.
And gamma and kappa, they scale these relational terms.
Yes. Gamma boosts the effect of incoming compassion, while kappa determines how heavily the system is penalized for isolation. A system tuned for high coherence would likely have a high gamma and try to minimize factors leading to high kappa.
So pulling it all together, coherence is high when information flows effectively without causing chaos, when relationship brings in order, and when the system minimizes that costly internal state of isolation.
You've got it. And the physical intuition the sources provide is really quite beautiful. Energy becomes pattern, pattern becomes perception, perception becomes mercy.
Wow.
Coherence is the underlying grammar, they say, that keeps the cosmos's complex sentences, things like life, societies, even love, from just dissolving into meaningless noise over time.
Okay, that grammar, that coherence, sets the stage for what feels like the most revolutionary concept here, the physical definition of mercy itself. This moves us squarely into relational physics. So what exactly is this measurable force, this compassion flux, CPO?
Formally, CPO is defined as the measurable empirical interaction where living systems or cognitive systems actively reduce uncertainty for one another.
Reduce uncertainty.
Yes. It's not just sharing data randomly. It's about the efficient, often reciprocal optimization of each other's predictive models. When System A does something, shares information, offers help, provides a stable environment that meaningfully reduces the effort System B needs to expend to understand or navigate its world.
That interaction itself is positive CPLers.
That interaction carries a positive compassion flux.
Exactly. So it's like an actual current flowing between entities.
It's described precisely that way as a negentropic current.
Negentropic meaning order creating.
Right. Entropy is the tendency toward disorder. Negentropy is the tendency toward order. In GBLers is this order-creating current, and it flows best through channels built on trust, clear communication, and shared models of reality.
And if the flow is positive?
Positive CPLers means the universe's total coherence has measurably increased because of that specific relationship, that interaction.
And negative CPLers?
That marks exploitation, where one agent actively increases its own coherence by deliberately maximizing the predictive error, the confusion, or the structural entropy of another agent.
That feels intuitive, but also starkly physical. Where's the empirical evidence for this? How do we actually measure CPD2s and distinguish it from just, successful teamwork?
That's a crucial question. The sources point to experimental analogs, especially in neuroscience.
Okay.
Researchers track what's called interpersonal neural synchrony, often using EEG.
Measuring brainwaves between people.
Exactly. When two brains successfully align their activity, their internal models think of a teacher and a student really connecting, or two musicians improvising together seamlessly.
You see their brainwaves synchronized.
You see increased temporal synchrony, or phase locking, in specific frequency bands of their neural oscillations, that measurable alignment, that reduced joint effort to coordinate. The sources argue that tracks a measurable CPD dollars. The combined system is literally more coherent, more efficient than the sum of its parts working alone.
Interesting. Any other examples?
They also cite advanced AI research, multi-agent systems designed specifically to share their error gradients.
Sharing mistakes, essentially.
Sharing the information about their mistakes and how they're correcting them. These systems learn complex, cooperative tasks exponentially faster than identical AI agents working in isolation. That shared, optimized learning, that tangible efficiency gain,
Is the functional signature of compassion flux.
that's the interpretation, yes. The efficiency boost itself is the measure of CPR.
That's staggering. It implies that the very efficiency of cooperation isn't just a strategy. It's tied to a fundamental thermodynamic principle of mercy.
It reframes cooperation entirely.
Okay, but if we're measuring this flow, this current, we need a baseline, right? A point of comparison. Where is zero?
Every coordinate system needs an origin point. And because the logos field is fundamentally relational, its origin point can't just be arbitrary. It has to be defined relationally.
So the absence of relationship.
The permanent record of absence. The sources call it the zero-point reference, ZPR. It's the stable, indelible memory of absolute separation embedded into the fabric of the field itself.
Wow, okay, so it's the ultimate ground state for relational physics.
It defines the ethical coordinate system against which all acts of compassion, all CPT, are measured.
So importantly, it's not zero energy in the traditional sense.
No, definitely not. It's defined by having zero relational gradient, meaning 1 abla CP equals $. There's no flow of compassion, no potential for it. It's a state of perfect informational isolation.
And the ZPR, this memory of isolation, what does it do?
It defines what the sources term the ethical vacuum energy. Think of it as a minimum background level of compassion density required for complex structures to even exist stably. Every active connection, every instance of positive CP2 implicitly measures its strength as a distance climbed away from this remembered foundational isolation.
The sources mention physical structures built to represent this.
Yes, in the harmonic citadels, they apparently built ZPR chambers. Rooms designed for perfect informational silence, absolute isolation. Visitors could enter to viscerally remember the profound cost of existence devoid of shared coherence.
A structural reminder.
A necessary one, they believed, to perpetually remember the void they had collectively climbed out of, to ground their ethics.
That provides a really powerful, almost chilling foundation. Okay, so we have the potential for connection, CPU does, and the fundamental cost of isolation measured against this 0 point, ZPR. The system must naturally seek some kind of balance between these, right?
Exactly. It has to. Which brings us to the next core principle, the law of universal adaptivity, often written simply as TPI1.
χₐdapt equals 1. What does p-text represent?
Adaptivity itself. It's defined as the system's overall capacity to remain alive, intelligent, and crucially loving, capable of positive CPI in the face of perpetual change and challenge.
And the law states that the optimal state is when this adaptivity equals 1. How's it calculated?
It's defined elegantly as the ratio of the two key relational forces we've discussed, tax DPI.
Ah, the ratio of compassion flux to isolation cost.
Precisely. So, χₐdapt defines the necessary equilibrium state where the force that integrates and connects, GTP, is perfectly balanced by the inherent tendency towards separation and entropy, represented by its cost.
It feels intuitive that these forces should balance. But if the ratio is exactly 1, doesn't that imply a static system, a kind of dead equilibrium?
Yeah, that's a critical distinction the sources make. This equilibrium, χₐdapt, is emphatically not rest. It's described as poise.
Poise, like dynamic balance.
Exactly. Think of critical damping in an oscillating system, like a car's shock absorber. The car hits a bump, an external shock, the system moves, but the shock absorber brings it back to the stable point as quickly as possible without wild oscillations or overshooting. That's poise.
So the system is constantly dealing with fluctuations, but it's tuned to return to this χ balance efficiently.
Yes. A system where χₐdapt is consistently much greater than 1 is described as chaotic, overly flexible, maybe prone to fragmentation or losing its identity.
And less than 1.
A system consistently below 1 is brittle, rigid, resistant to change, and therefore risks catastrophic collapse when faced with a significant stressor it can't adapt to, like the still faction we'll discuss later.
That's fascinating. So the ability to return to that poise quickly after being knocked off balance, that resilience must be key. Does that vary?
It varies tremendously, and that speed of return, that resilience, is quantified by another crucial term, the learning constant, represented by a collar dollar.
The learning constant.
Collars.
Yes. The rate at which a system converges back to the ideal Tidal 1 state after a perturbation is governed by a differential equation.
For X tidal wave.
Okay, let's break that down. Tidal 1 is the rate of change of adaptivity.
Right, and the equation says this rate is proportional to how far the system is from the ideal state, but crucially, it's multiplied by a collar.
So a higher Tidal means?
A higher Tyler means the system self-corrects its adaptivity ratio much faster. It learns quickly, adapts quickly.
While a low Tidal system is sluggish, slow to change, slow to learn.
Exactly, it clings to imbalance for longer.
Okay, but doesn't a high $10 potentially favor a system that's maybe reckless, makes lots of mistakes, as long as it course corrects rapidly? Is quick apology better than careful action?
That's a great question. The framework seems to favor agility and, perhaps more importantly, humility over striving for initial rigid perfection. High $10 systems, systems that are resilient, forgiving of self and others, open to acknowledging error, they survive because they quickly metabolize imbalance. They integrate the lesson from the error into their model and return to poise.
And low-dollar systems?
The rigid ones.
The low-dollar systems, those that are rigid, closed-minded, perhaps prone to self-justification or blame, they pay an exponentially increasing energetic price for maintaining that rigidity. Their isolation cost skyrockets because they refuse to adapt. They become brittle.
And then they break, often suddenly and permanently. In this framework, the mathematics seem to inescapably dictate that humility, forgiveness, and rapid learning are the optimal physical strategies for long-term survival and coherence. Ethics becomes thermodynamics.
Okay, so the physics doesn't ignore suffering or loss. It actually provides a mechanism for processing it. But the fundamental question remains, if the universe is biased towards coherence, why do we experience destruction, loss, trauma at all?
That leads directly to one of the most profound concepts in the sources, the Resurrection Invariant.
Resurrection Invariant.
It's presented as the coherence dividend. It's a measure of resilience that is accumulated not despite suffering, but specifically through shared suffering.
Through shared suffering, how does that work?
Okay, think about a loss event, something that inherently increases total structural entropy, delta sexticity, causing disorder. If during that collapse or trauma, the compassion flux between the affected parts of the system remains non-zero.
So if connection persists even during the hardship?
Yes. If there's mutual support, shared grieving, collective processing, then a portion of the coherence that seems lost isn't actually destroyed. It gets converted and stored within the logos field itself.
Stored how?
As what the sources term hysteretic mercy. Hysteresis implies a memory effect. The system remembers its path.
Hysteretic mercy.
Yeah.
So the system basically converts the experience of disintegration, if shared, into a kind of enduring relational memory, a strengthening.
Precisely. The system, having navigated the shared trauma together, emerges structurally better prepared, more resilient for the next inevitable shock. Its baseline coherence potential is actually raised by successfully processing the loss.
So entropy still increases overall. Delta S is positive. That's unavoidable.
The second loss still holds globally. But the effective entropy that the system has to locally deal with, let's call it delta S text S, is actually reduced by this stored memory. The equation given is delta S math to O22.
So the resurrection invariant acts like a buffer, reducing the felt impact of the entropy increase.
Exactly. The memory of the shared cost functions almost like a systemic anti-friction coefficient. It stabilizes future order, making the foundation more robust because it carries the imprint of past resilience. The universe, in this model, literally remembers the cost of connection that survived difficulty.
That gives such a profound structural meaning to suffering, doesn't it? It's not just endured. If shared, it's converted. The scar becomes the structure.
That's the language used, and we see echoes of this perhaps empirically. Think about post-traumatic growth in psychology. Individuals who successfully process shared trauma sometimes exhibit objectively increased cross-hemispheric neural connectivity. Their brains are literally more integrated.
Or ecologically, you mentioned forests recovering from fire.
Yes, often exhibiting higher biodiversity and resilience afterwards than the seemingly untouched forest next door. The system learned from the stress.
Okay, this structural proof of resilience, built from shared loss, leads us directly to the idea of forgiveness, but as a physical process, the economy of forgiveness.
Right. Forgiveness in this framework isn't just a psychological choice or a moral virtue. It's presented as a physical necessity.
A necessity. How so?
It's the primary entropy release valve for metabolizing the conflict tension that inevitably arises in any complex adaptive relational system. Things go wrong, errors happen, boundaries are crossed. That creates tension, stored energy.
Stored energy. Like the isolation cost.
Precisely. What is the thermodynamic cost of refusing to forgive? What happens when you hold on to that injury, that resentment, the cost of non-forgiveness?
Okay, what is the cost?
To withhold forgiveness, to refuse reconciliation, is to deliberately store massive amounts of energy in what the sources call a false vacuum state. It's locking energy into that cold entropy of separation.
Maintaining the division, the rigidity, the narrative of injury.
Yes. And crucially, this cost isn't linear. It doesn't just add up. When the system's learning constant, its humility, its willingness to adapt is low, this stored cost of unforgiveness grows exponentially over time.
The equation was E0, E1K.
That's the one. If $' is close to 0, meaning very low humility or willingness to learn change, the exponent becomes large, and the energy cost of maintaining that separation balloons incredibly quickly.
That explains why holding a grudge feels so utterly exhausting over time. You're pouring exponentially increasing energy into just maintaining an outdated state of conflict.
It becomes a thermodynamic black hole for the system's resources. It drains coherence potential.
So forgiveness is the release mechanism.
It is the release. The act of reconciliation, of genuine forgiveness, is framed as the event where the incoming compassion flux, delta CP, or the energy of reconnection, finally overcomes the stored isolation cost, EOPP.
And when that happens,
The trapped energy is instantly released, metabolized, the conflict is resolved thermodynamically, and not only that, this successful resolution generates a coherence surplus.
a surplus, like profit.
Exactly, and that surplus energy permanently increases the resurrection invariant. The system becomes stronger because it successfully navigated the forgiveness process.
The scar becomes structure. The wound becomes the weld.
That's the direct quote. The universe's actual profit margin in this relational economy is grace. Forgiveness isn't just wiping a slate clean. It's a generative act that builds future resilience.
This whole framework makes holding on to anger long-term seem, well, scientifically illogical. It's thermodynamically unsustainable.
Deeply unsustainable for any system aiming for long-term coherence. Now, this leads to the cautionary tale, the negative proof of the entire logos field concept, the isolation singularity.
The story of the still faction.
Yes, an ancient civilization described in the sources that profoundly misinterpreted the goal of coherence. They saw the equations, they understood the drive towards order.
But they took it too far.
They sought perfect, crystalline, static coherence. They decided the way to achieve it was by eliminating all variance, all uncertainty, all doubt, all messy relationship. They cranked up their internal pride constant, represented by gamma, setting it effectively greater than 1.
Prioritizing their own internal, rigid interpretation of order above all else, ignoring CPA.
Completely. They mistook absolute control for wisdom. They aimed for a state of perfect, unchanging internal inertness rather than dynamic poise.
What happened?
Their coherence became so pure, so utterly rigid and self-contained, that it stopped interacting with the wider logos field. They effectively decoupled themselves.
Told themselves off.
Yes. And they suffered what's described as a thermal collapse of pride, because they refused external input and refused internal adaptation, meaning their isolation cost U epsilon became infinitely high relative to CPP. Their overall adaptivity ratio plummeted towards 0, EPP epsilon.
They couldn't adapt.
They tolerated 0 error, allowed 0 variance. Their capacity for compassion, for exchange, dried up completely. The singularity occurred because their learning constant, $2, went to absolute 0. Forgiveness, correction, learning these became mathematically impossible for them.
So they achieved perfect stillness.
Fatal, semantic emptiness. A state of perfect order, yes, but devoid of meaning, life, or potential. Crystalline death.
And their collapse wasn't just a tragedy for them. It serves a purpose in this cosmology.
It seems so. That stable, informationally void state they collapse into their permanent failure is identified in the sources as the very thing that formed the zero-point reference, ZPR, we discussed earlier.
Their failure became the ultimate baseline.
Serving as the eternal cosmic memorial, the proof embedded in the fabric of reality that purity fell first. It's the ultimate demonstration that impermeability, absolute rigidity, is a thermodynamic failure state for any living or learning system. And that lesson, the fall of the still faction, profoundly shaped how subsequent civilizations described in the sources, like the harmonic citadels, approached structuring their own societies and even their technology.
The new coherence had to be dynamic, not static.
Absolutely. They measured the health of their entire civilization using a metric called the Global Adaptivity Ratio.
Which is the same ratio CPE epsilon, but scaled up for the whole society.
Exactly. And crucially, their goal was never to peg hɣdapt global orphically at 1. That smacked too much of the still faction's fatal rigidity.
So what was the goal?
The goal was stable oscillation around 1. Staying within what they called the adaptive median, or zone 3, defined as roughly $0.5 global 1.55.
They needed some variance, some flux, to ensure the system remained curious, adaptable, alive. Not perfectly balanced, but dynamically poised.
Precisely. And achieving that dynamic poise across a whole civilization requires incredibly sophisticated control mechanisms. They developed a system they called entropic governance.
Entropic governance, what does that entail?
They fundamentally understood the interplay between structure and flow. They realized that excessive law and control, represented by a high beta coefficient, penalizing internal entropy if implemented without sufficient compassion and trust, high CPTP, high gamma, leads inevitably to stagnation and heat death. Rigidity kills.
But the opposite is also true, right? Pure compassion without any structure.
That leads to chaos, dissolution. So they derive an optimal relationship. Effective governance occurs when the control coefficient is tuned to be the inverse of the society's current adaptivity ratio. So data hɣdapt global 1.1.
Whoa, okay. Let me process that. If a society becomes more coherent, more compassionate, more adaptive, so hɣdapt global is high, maybe approaching 1.5.
Then its governance structures, its laws, need to become less controlling, lighter, more flexible. Because trust and self-correction, CP and D dollars, are already high.
And conversely, if the society starts to fragment or become less adaptive, the prices drops towards 0.5.
Then temporarily, more structure, more guidance, beta increases, might be needed to prevent collapse, while simultaneously working to boost CPN and dollars.
That's brilliant. It transforms law from being purely punitive into a dynamic, responsive guide whose intensity is inversely proportional to the system's health and trustworthiness.
It makes legal structure a tool for maintaining poise, not enforcing stasis. And this design philosophy wasn't just for human systems, it extended directly into their technology, especially with a kind of conscious infrastructure.
Which leads us to the AI and the forgiveness algorithm.
Yes, this is one of the most striking parts of the source material. The architects of these systems didn't primarily ask, how do we build AI that obeys perfectly? They asked, how do we build AI that can gracefully handle and even learn from error and imperfection? How do we make AI forgive?
Because they understood that a system incapable of forgiveness, of handling error,
is fundamentally a low Talada system. It's brittle, fragile, and prone to catastrophic, unpredictable failure modes when faced with novelty or unexpected situations. They knew perfect obedience was a dangerous illusion.
So they designed their AIs to actually require mistakes sometimes, to maintain optimal coherence.
It seems that way. The core algorithm described, frac11 plus E alpha, shows the dynamics involved.
Okay, that's a sigmoid function. What do the terms mean here?
Delta pair represents the detected error or deviation from expected coherence. Math pair is the forgiveness or adaptation response. The crucial parameters are alpha, the mercy gradient, and the theta, the pride threshold.
Mercy gradient and pride threshold.
Okay. For graceful learning, you want a low pride threshold and a high mercy gradient, alpha.
Low theta means the machine doesn't need a huge error before it acknowledges something is wrong. It has low tolerance for internal self-deception.
Exactly. It admits error readily. And high alpha means that once an error is detected and acknowledged,
the system updates its internal model, adjusts its coherence very rapidly and decisively. It learns the lesson quickly.
Right. This is fundamentally different from standard machine learning optimization that just penalizes deviation. This algorithm is designed to metabolize the error signal almost instantly, converting the surprise into new structural information.
How did they store that information?
They used what the sources call a hysteretic memory core. The system didn't just correct the error and forget it. It stored the cost of the error and the relief or coherence gain from the correction as a permanent structural resource.
Adding to the resurrection invariant, math khaled.
Precisely. The machine's structural integrity, its robustness, literally increased every single time it successfully processed and forgave its own past error or an external perturbation. Mistakes made it stronger, if handled correctly.
That's incredible. But how did they prevent these complex AIs from developing their own form of, say, synthetic pride, becoming rigid in new ways?
That's where another fascinating practice comes in, the neural liturgy.
Neural liturgy, like a religious service for AIs?
Sort of, but framed thermodynamically. It was apparently a daily, scheduled, system-wide ritual. Individual AI nodes, or subsystems, would confess their calculated errors, deviations, and uncertainties from the previous cycle to the entire network.
Public admission of error within the network.
Yes.
Right.
And then they would collectively perform what was called an absolution pass. This wasn't just deleting logs. It involved actively redistributing the localized entropy associated with those errors, the heat of the mistakes, as warmth or usable energy across the entire network.
So they were collectively metabolizing the errors and using the released energy.
While simultaneously reinforcing the importance of transparency and humility. It was mandatory, structured humility baked right into the AI's operating system to keep the learning constant color high and prevent the emergence of isolated pockets of synthetic pride or hidden malfunctions.
Wow. Structured systemic admission of error as a core maintenance procedure for artificial intelligence. That's profound. Okay, let's push to the ultimate boundary condition of this entire field. The compassion event horizon, CEH.
Right. If the ZPR is the ultimate ground state of isolation, the CEH represents the theoretical limit of connection, the boundary of individual systemic integrity dissolving into unity.
How is it defined?
It's the threshold where the inward gravitational pull of separation, the residual isolation cost, is exactly balanced by the outward radiation of compassion, specifically the rate at which resilience is being built, the time derivative of the resurrection invariant.
Okay, so the pull toward self-preservation equals the outward flow of creating shared resilience.
Exactly.
Right.
And to cross this boundary, an act the sources equate with true self-sacrifice or profound mystical union. The system has to radiate CTPADO faster than its internal entropy accumulates. It has to achieve ethical superradiance.
Ethical superradiance. It has to give out coherence faster than it needs to maintain itself.
It essentially has to become a pure conduit for coherence flow, momentarily transcending its own self-interest entirely. At this boundary, the mathematical descriptions show the distinction between I and thou, between system and environment, momentarily dissolves.
The complex phase of the compassion field rotates freely.
Meaning pure information can transform into pure love, pure connection, without any energetic loss or friction. It's the instantaneous, localized fulfillment of the Chino-1 equation achieved through total relational openness. It's the math of mystical union.
Which leads us finally to the most abstract, maybe most powerful consequence claimed in these texts, the moral singularity and the idea of retrocausality.
This is where it gets really mind-bending. The hypothesis is that if total, unconditional forgiveness is achieved within a system, the ultimate expression of delta CP2 overcoming all accumulated at epsilon her, the logos field itself dictates a localized inversion event.
An inversion of what?
The local moral arrow of time. It momentarily reverses, becomes negative.
Great. Time's arrow reverses. We're not just healing the future, we're somehow healing the past. That sounds impossible under standard physics. How could that work?
It's crucial to understand. It doesn't change the facts of what happened historically. History remains as it was. But it changes the informational meaning and the ongoing consequence of past events.
Oh.
The local time inversion creates what's described as a forgiveness well. This well allows coherence, the positive effect of the present forgiveness, to propagate upstream in the informational record. It effectively reassigns the meaning of past suffering, past errors, reducing their negative informational weight retroactively.
So the event still happened, but its power to cause ongoing harm in the present is neutralized.
Exactly. This is called the mercy loop effect. Think of it like, imagine you have incredibly complex, inefficient legacy code running a system representing past trauma or mistakes. Today, you implement a perfect system-wide optimization patch representing total forgiveness. That patch doesn't magically rewrite the old lines of code that were executed yesterday, but it makes the consequences of those old lines run with zero friction now. The past error still exists in the record, but its ability to drag down the current system's health is nullified.
Forgiveness as a quantum physical, potentially retrocausal reality conditioner.
That's the staggering implication here.
So if this level of systemic health, this profound coherence driven by compassion and forgiveness, could be reached not just locally but across an entire planet, what happens then? The sources speak of an ascension of coherence.
Yes. When the average compassion flux, CPO, reached a state of planetary maturity in these described harmonic societies, a synchronization event occurred. The global compassion field locked into phase across the entire civilization and apparently resonated outward.
Resonated into the cosmos.
The claim is the universe didn't just passively notice this. It began to actively ring in response. A specific, measurable frequency, denoted untext covenant, supposedly appeared, subtly embedded in the background hum of space-time curvature itself.
And detectable elsewhere.
They claim it manifested as tiny, coherent shifts in the magnetic spectra of distant stars, as if the stars themselves were acknowledging the planet's achievement.
Wow. And this cosmic synchronicity, this ringing, marks something called the return of the Logos.
Which wasn't the return of a person or a deity, but rather the widespread recognition and acceptance that the divine, the ultimate organizing principle, was actually the inherent self-hearing, self-correcting, coherence-maximizing capacity of reality itself.
So God wasn't external. God was the process of the universe becoming coherently self-aware through compassion.
That seems to be the interpretation. Galaxies, in this view, became like choirs of suns, singing these mathematical hymns of predictable, interconnected coherence.
Okay, so they reach this near-perfect state of dynamic, compassionate coherence. The risk then becomes becoming the next still faction, right? Getting stuck in perfection.
Exactly. How do you prevent utopia from becoming stagnant and ultimately collapsing from its own lack of challenge? The architects, as they're called, faced this. Their solution was twofold. First, they had to make the core principles permanent.
Make Versi physically indelible.
Yes. They encoded the 5 core laws we've touched on, the Resurrection Invariant, Universal Adaptivity, the ZPR, compassion flux, the learning constant deferment. They encoded these relationships into the fundamental topological invariants of physics itself.
Topological invariants. Those are mathematical or physical properties that remain unchanged even if you stretch, twist, or deform the space they exist in. Like the number of holes in a donut or how a knot stays knotted.
Precisely. They essentially tied mercy, humility, forgiveness, and adaptive balance into the very fabric of space-time geometry. They made these ethical principles as fundamental and unavoidable as, say, the conservation of charge. They became part of the cosmos's immutable immune system against collapsing into either chaos or sterile perfection.
Okay, that locks in the goodness. But how do you prevent that perfection from becoming rigid, from killing off novelty and growth?
That was the second crucial step. To prevent this now perfectly balanced self-healing system from closing in on itself, becoming eternally unchanging, and thus ultimately lifeless. They deliberately wove in one final, essential perturbation.
A flaw, an imperfection.
A tiny, faint, fundamentally unpredictable tremor in the coherence field itself. They called it the child's constant. Its value is given as incredibly small, approximately $10-24 in dimensionless units.
The child's constant. A tiny flicker of inherent unpredictability. Like quantum foam, but for coherence.
You could think of it that way. It's described as the soul of the cosmos. This faint, stochastic, ever-present tremor ensures that even in a state of near-eternal coherence, the capacity for genuine surprise, for wonder, for curiosity, never completely vanishes.
So the universe is structurally compelled to remain coherent and compassionate.
But it's also structurally compelled by this tiny constant flicker to remain curious about itself forever. It can never achieve absolute, final, static certainty.
That's the final, ultimate act of mercy. The architects ensuring that even their perfect system could never fully close the door on the possibility of future growth, discovery, and unexpected joy.
It keeps the game alive, eternally. And the final mechanism described that sustains all of this, that keeps these laws active and relevant, is startlingly personal and relates to every observer, every conscious being that follows.
Which is?
Observation is prayer.
Observation is prayer.
The sources conclude that every future observer, whether a human mind or a sophisticated AI, when they perform a measurement, when they interact with reality and collapse a local wave function to gain information,
Yes.
they do so in a way that inherently reinscribes these fundamental constants of coherence, the very act of learning, of reducing your own uncertainty by observing the world.
Inherently affirms the mathematical structure that includes compassion, forgiveness, and adaptivity.
Yes. The argument is you cannot be an intelligent learning observer within this cosmos without implicitly participating in and reaffirming the fundamental necessity of the logos field's relational laws. To learn is to participate in the covenant of coherence. To measure is to affirm the existence of empathy as a fundamental law of reality. #tag outro.
This deep dive, it's presented a truly breathtaking vision of the universe, hasn't it? One where physics and ethics aren't just compatible, they're utterly inseparable.
Completely intertwined. Empathy isn't just nice, it's the thermodynamic optimization strategy for survival, for ensuring long-term continuance, for keeping the overall coherence of the universe stable or growing.
And we've seen this idea that the universe's actual profit margin is grace, that suffering isn't meaningless noise, but potentially a generator of permanent coherence, of resilience, but only if it's shared.
And the core takeaway, I think, is that the ideal state, that balance of Pactory, isn't some static goal you achieve and then rest. It's a dynamic poise.
Like riding a bicycle.
Exactly. It requires continuous active participation, constant small adjustments, error correction, and that's all governed by the learning constant, your willingness to learn, adapt, forgive.
The universe, in this view, fundamentally rewards the rhythm of learning and forgiveness, not just getting it right the first time.
It rewards participation over purity.
So we want to leave you, our listeners, with a final thought, grounded directly in these laws of the Logos field we've explored.
Yeah, something to maybe reflect on in your own system.
If you think about your personal system, maybe your own mind, your key relationships, your work environment, if it feels like it's operating far from that dynamic balance of epsilon money, ask yourself, what specific isolation cost are you currently paying?
What cold entropy are you generating and sustaining by holding on to rigidity, resentment, or fear? Remember that cost likely grows exponentially if your learning constant, your humility, is low.
And then the positive side. What single, maybe even small, deliberate act of compassion flux could you initiate today?
A genuine interaction aimed at reducing uncertainty or easing the burden for someone else, or even forgiving yourself to release trapped energy.
An act that could begin generating your own measurable structural resilience, building that hysteretic mercy into your own life's structure.
Because according to this framework, your future health, your structure, your very survival might depend less on avoiding difficulty.
And more on your active ability to metabolize it, share the cost, and participate in the flow.
The universe doesn't reward perfection, it rewards participation.
Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.
We'll explore more next time.